It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. Wow, it's a lovely hotel. I love coming to Salt Lake City. I have a number of friends and acquaintances here. I'm having a lovely time. I hope you enjoy my comments. And I want to begin by, look, I'm going to tell you, I think we do have a recession. I'm in the camp that's still thinking a recession is likely and possible. The Fed's going to keep rates too high for too long and probably drive us in. I'm in a minority of the population of economists. I'd say 60% of economists think we're not going to have a recession, so I'm in the minority of 40. For a while, it was 40% a while ago, and then it became 60, 70%, and now it's back to 60 or 70 not thinking. So the thinking has generally changed. I've been in the recession camp pretty much the whole time. That said, all recessions aren't equal. I don't want you to instantly reflexively go back and think, oh, recession, that's like 08, 09. Or if you're old enough to remember 81, 82 or 74, 75 or something. It's not. Those are recessions you remember. Each of those recessions was the worst recession since the Great Depression. This will be a regular, ordinary garden variety recession. Don't sit back and think this is going to destroy your business. It's going to be horrible. The wheels are going to fall off the bus. Nah. If you remember, I don't even remember the 1970 recession, 80 recession, 90 recession, or 2000 recession. 4. Those are all eminently forgettable. They were short, they were brief, they weren't that bad. This is likely to be in that category. Yeah, we can talk about commercial real estate still. So I think we will have one, but I don't think it'll be particularly meaningful or memorably bad. And in terms of real estate, many sectors in real estate already have suffered a recession, and they'll improve regardless of what happens. But let's look at the data. Let's begin by looking at the data. First, we're going to, my name and topic. The US economy, remarkably resilient. I should almost have a comma there, so far. But it really has done well. It's been surprisingly strong. Consumer spending has been very good, and that's what's been driving our economy. It's not been so much other sectors, although they've helped, but it's been primarily a consumer-led economy here. Consumers keep spending money, and they're having a good time doing it. They're enjoying themselves, despite all kinds of whatever. High interest rates, low interest rates, high inflation, low inflation, good consumer sentiment, bad consumer sentiment. Consumers keep spending. It's unbelievable. So let's look at GDP. This is all goods and services produced in the US. It's composed of 4 parts, but the 4 parts all aren't the same size. That's really important to remember. This is about 70% of GDP. These two are both each about 16 and a half, and that's -2 or 3 because we run a chronic trade deficit. Right now, C is very strong. My fear is that C weakens. This is my concern here. This is weakened already a little bit. Government's weakening a little bit. Exports minus imports have weakened a little bit for a whole bunch of reasons. But this is the linchpin. If this doesn't weaken, we don't go into recession. If it does, we probably do. So consumers now, besides being the single biggest sector of the economy and consumption at 70%, are what's keeping us from recession. And that's usually the case. You have to have tremendously strong here to compensate for that, given that it's 70%, right? But these are weakening a little bit, but this is still strong. And the key question is, will it stay strong? If it does, we're in luck. We avoid the recession like we did 3 or 4 times in the last 50, 60, 70 years. And we'll discuss why. I want to begin by looking at automobile sales. It's a very strange thing to look at first, but why? This is one of the reasons we think I'm hopeful. It's not my base case, but I'm hopeful that we avoid a recession. It's because the economy has energy from COVID still. We're trying to get our economy back to normal, but there's still hangover effects, but these are positive hangover effects, not negative ones. So for example, automobile sales are remarkably high, given how high interest rates are. What are auto rates at? They're pretty expensive to get an auto loan right now. Yet, in the last year and a half or so, what have automobile sales done? They've gone up. This isn't because rates are high. This is in spite of it, of course, but it's because of COVID. During COVID, supply chain snapped and you couldn't get a car. Used car prices went crazy. New car prices went crazy. It was unbelievable. The car lots were virtually empty in 21. You drive by a car dealership and there were no cars, right? So because of this lack of supply and tremendous demand, now that demand is able to be sated with increased supply, sales go crazy. This is not normal. When the Fed raises rates, what do they expect to happen? They expect interest-sensitive sectors of the economy to go to hell. They expect housing to go to hell, new construction to go to hell, new auto manufacturing to go to hell, and commercial construction to go to hell, right? And autos and housing have not been supported by the data, and even commercial construction in total, because of government stimulus from Washington in the form of the mistitled Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, has propped up construction pretty well. So this is very weird between fiscal policy from Washington, pent-up demand from consumers. The economy is not doing all that badly. How long this lasts? That's the million-dollar question. But this is one of those signs of evidence that our economy is behaving very weirdly, and the interest rates are not having the desired effect in nearly in an expeditious way as they thought. Now, this is total consumer spending. That's 70% of GDP, or 69. This is the show. This is the show. And if you look at this slide, there's no evidence of any deleterious effects to the economy long term because of COVID. Our consumption patterns were on this trajectory pre-COVID, and just extrapolate the line and you'd be right where we are. Right? There's no evidence of recession. I mean, there's 2-month recession there, and then the quick recovery from COVID because of massive fiscal stimulus from Washington, D.C., in loans to businesses and gifts to businesses and households, and don't pay your rent and all that kind of unemployment insurance that exceeded incomes and for the lower classes and so on. This is unbelievable. There's no evidence. We're on the same trajectory now, same growth path of spending that we were before. And interest rates went to zero, propping up all kinds of stuff too. But, and this is the but, this is why I'm nervous. I'll explain to you why I'm nervous. And this may or may not turn out to be true at the end. We'll know in a year whether I'm right or wrong or whatever happens. Of course, no one knows the future. But here's the story. Look, savings rates are crazy low. Unemployment's what, 3.7%? This is almost the lowest unemployment rate we've had since Vietnam. Vietnam was 3.5. This is 0.2 points above. And 4 months ago, we had the lowest. It was 3.4. That was the lowest since the 50s. Anybody who wants a job gets a job, and we can't save any money. I'm not thrilled about that. That's weird. It's just weird. And then there's this. Credit card use. So this is the housing bust, global financial crisis. And it's 18 months. That's the width of the bar, the recession bar. This was a 2-month recession, the shortest in history. And heretofore, no one believed you could have a 2-month recession. It's like, that's just too damn short. There's no recession. But it was so deep and so broad, it made up for the fact that it wasn't the duration, depth, duration and so on. But this one was very short, but very deep and very broad. Here, 18 months, credit card use peaks out here. Okay, fine. And it takes the better part of a decade for credit card balances, unpaid balances, rolled over balances, to return to where they were before the housing bust. Here it took, like an hour and a half. And we pay off our debts quickly right away. We got the first stimmy checks, and people were nervous. No one knew how long COVID would last. No one knew how bad it would be. Were we going to die? I mean, we were all very nervous. So this was a reflection of nervousness savings. Stock market's collapsing, right? First couple of months, stock market goes to hell. So we're going to rebuild our wealth. We're saving money, paying off our bills. Great. And then we begin to go on this slope. And look at how steep this is. This slope is much shallower than this slope. So we're adding to our debt much more quickly. Now, this is not the end of the world. We're not going to go to hell in a handbasket. The New York Fed's going to come out with data today on just this question of where we are now, what's credit card use as the end of Q4, and they'll have some just weird numbers. Oh, it exceeds $1.1 trillion or something. Blow it off. It's not that important. It's growing. It's growing fast. That's my concern. As a percentage of GDP, it's not that bad. It's growing fast, and the interest rate on the cards are high. It's no longer 16.99. Now it's 21.5%, 22%, right? So you're putting money on quickly at a high rate, and you're not saving money. Prior slide here showing that. This is not a great sign. And the reason this is happening, or happened, and is happening, is this. This is real income, change in real income, and that's inflation, essentially. So if you're above the line, wages are exceeding inflation. If you're below the line, inflation exceeds wage growth. So we lost all this money. We were getting a 4% pay raise, and inflation was 8-9%. So we're losing 3, 4, 5% over the course of 18, 19, 20 months. That's a lot of money. And that money we haven't recovered that loss of income. not loss of wealth. I'll show you what I mean here. So this is disposable income. This is how much money you have after you pay taxes. Payroll taxes, income taxes, whatever, right? So what do you have to spend? And if you look at this trajectory, we'd be there, and we're here. It's $1 trillion short. That's why we're on the credit card. That's why we're not saving money, reducing our savings rates and increasing use of the credit card, plastic, because we're $1 trillion below. But there's one more saving grace, and that's Stimmy Check 1, Stimmy Check 2, Stimmy Check 3, and that's symbolic of fiscal stimulus, right? There are PPP loans that were forgiven to all these corporations, and there are all kinds of other money available, right? And as a result of that, we also have excess COVID savings. Now, COVID savings is about to run out. And among the, again, there's an article I read this morning, it was in the Journal. It talked about McDonald's because they released earnings yesterday. And McDonald's flat out said, we're losing customers who are earning less than $45,000. This is McDonald's. This isn't like fancy restaurant in Aspen at, Shea whatever here or whatever. This is McDonald's buying a burger and they can't afford to buy a burger. So there's something a little bit askew here. Nothing's horrible, but all this says, keep your eyes open and your ears peeled, eyes peeled, ears open, whatever the expression is, because something just seems weird. Now this, we know in the lower classes, the bottom half of the population, they're out of money. It's the top half of the population that has. And the top quarter, or 10%, still has quite a bit. But they're not going to spend it. They are investing it, right? You've had this money for 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's going into your wealth now. You're not going to use it as consumption. It's going to go, you're going to invest in Google or buy QQQ, or whatever, or some ETF, QQQ ETF or whatever. So this is gone. Credit cards are being used up a lot. Savings can't get lower. Consumers, something's got to give. Either we got to get a recession, don't have to, or we have income growth improves, labor markets stay good, wages keep beating inflation, the Fed lowers interest rates, inflation falls more, the Fed lowers rates, and we skate by and skirt the recession. I certainly hope it's the latter. No one wants a recession, obviously, but remember, recessions are about 1/7 of the time. Normal, 16, 17% of the time we are in a recession. So this recession shouldn't be something that's like terrifying and awful. They're not great, but they happen on a regular basis, right? But this is one more piece of secret sauce that we've got. And there's pent-up demand. I mean, you read about these articles of people going to hear Taylor Swift, and what are they spending? $2,000 for a ticket? I mean, that just seems crazy, right? But people are happy to do it. $300, $400, live music. Hotels are expensive. Airline tickets are. We're doing things we couldn't do. We bought enough Weber grills and big screen TVs to watch outside. You didn't have to have a mask in 21. Now we're partying hard. There's huge pent-up demand for stuff, which is helping consumer spending. So COVID really has changed the deck chairs here. We can argue how much, but it's certainly we're recovering and going back to normal. But it takes a while to get there. And the longer it takes is because we have excess savings and pent-up demand and so on, and still strong demand for automobiles. This is weird behavior. It's weird behavior. This is inventories, inventory to sales ratios. And I look at this one in particular, which is here before COVID, and then it collapses to here. This is retailers' inventory to sales ratios. So the whole thing is designed that you can walk into a store and buy a pair of pants, right? Or a pair of laces, or a pair of eyeglasses, or a dress or something, right? That's what it's all about. And when it's normal, it's between normally as low as 1.35, as high as 1.5. You can ignore the recessions when it goes crazy. When you're in a recession, it isn't that inventories go up, it's that sales collapse, right? So your inventory now suddenly lasts a lot longer than it would otherwise have. So ignoring these, it's between 1.35 and 1.5. Here's COVID is 1.45, upper end of 1.4, 1.5. Here it collapses, and this generates inflation. This is a primary generator of inflation. There's nothing to buy in the stores. And then you add to that fiscal stimulus, which was utterly brain dead in retrospect. Congress should never have given us the first stimmy check, or the second stimmy check, or the third stimmy check. They should have done a lot of these things, but at the time, no one knew. There was a bad recession, it was a weird recession, and the last 2 recessions, like almost every recession, is caused by a lack of confidence. Consumers don't want to spend. So the government said, well, we'll give you cash, you'll spend the money, and it'll alleviate or ameliorate the problems of the recessionary pressures. But the problem was supply chain snapped at the same time. So here we have inventories that are low. We have lots of cash to spend, and no one's going to the factories to make whatever it is they got to make. And that drives inflation very high. A series of bad luck and mistakes. And then the shooting war in Europe. I mean, that's just the dumbest thing in the world, right? So it's better. So inventories have improved. The cost of goods is now again declining. So they were cheaper before COVID. They got quite expensive. Now they're coming down a bit, right? This is right. Economists are happy. But traditionally, the last 20, 30 years, generally, the cost of goods declines consistently. We have negative 0.5% on goods. We have 2.5% inflation on services. And combined, you get 2% inflation. That's what we've had. Goods are now declining again. Car prices are coming down. Used car prices are coming down and so on, partly because of this. China's selling us stuff, and they have deflation in their country, so they're exporting deflation to us, which is at one level pleasant for us. But the fact that China's exporting deflation and their 10-year treasuries are 2.5% is telling you they got some real problems in their economy. Don't expect China to bail us out, not literally, but in 08, 09, they stimulated the crap out of their economy and helped us get out of this, to some extent, out of the rut of what they're not doing it now. There's a whole bunch of reasons, I think, all wrong, but that's besides it. We can talk about it during Q&A. This is helping reduce inflation. This is helping reduce inflation too. Global supply chains. Global supply chains were normal before COVID, then March or February, and then things get expensive for a few months, they get better, and then they go crazy. And that's when inventories were at 1.1. There's nothing available. The stores are empty. The shelves are empty. You go to Amazon, they don't sell it. Wherever you go, Shopify, whatever, it doesn't matter. Chewy, your dog is hungry, you got real problems. Then things get better and we're fine. And now lately it's gotten worse because of the Houthis. This is the latest problem. But don't think of this as a problem like it was before. This is a tiny problem. This is not an inflation-generating problem we have. It's a tiny little fly in the ointment, tiny fly. It'll raise inflation by 1/10 of a point or something. This is not meaningful. This caused the cost of a shipping container, the price of renting a shipping container from China to the east coast of China to the west coast of the US to go up by a factor of 10 times. It went from $1,700 to $17,000 or $1,800 to $18,000. Now it's back at $1,700. Now it's at $3,000. Okay, big deal. This is not an inflationary problem. It's a minor problem. The other problem we happen to face at the same time that the Suez Canal is struggling because of the Houthis, and Egypt's in real fiscal trouble in part because of that, is the Panama Canal is also in trouble, right? The lake in the middle there between the ocean, the Pacific and the Atlantic is Lake Gaitun. And Lake Gaitun in the middle of a rainforest. And what happens? They have no rain. So they can't send the ships nearly as full. So fewer ships are going, not as packed. And as a result, there's backups there too. So you got problems with people going around a Cape of Good Hope or Tierra del Fuego or whatever it is, right? But you got longer ship times. So the more ships are being used, the cost of renting ships has gone up a little bit too. Not an inflationary problem. Ignore it. It'll add pennies or a nickel or a dime to the cost of whatever it is that's being imported. But this is generally a good story. So this is deflationary too. That's good. And then there's household balance sheets. This is Q through Q3. We'll get to Q4 data soon, right? It's fine. This was the all-time high. That was the end of 21. Because the stock market high had been Jan 2 of 22, or Jan 3, or whatever the Monday was there, or Tuesday. And then it took 2 years, and just now, like last week, right? Last 2 weeks or something, we broke through the record of that. And house prices have generally increased since then too. So it's going up a little bit. So households are happy-ish. There's wealth there that can help consumer spending. Prices are down a little bit. Oil prices have gone nowhere for the last couple of years. This was when the Russians invaded Ukraine. And that looked really bad. And in Europe, the prices were astoundingly high, not for oil. Oil's a global market, right? Everyone pays the same price, pretty much. We use West Texas Intermediate. In Europe, they use Brent, North Sea crude more. They don't import your oil from here to there. That's more from the Middle East, North Sea. But then prices came down because the U.S. produced more oil, Canada produced more oil, Brazil produced more oil, Guyana produced more oil. Who knew about Guyana? They're now a world power in energy. They're producing 300,000 to 400,000 barrels a day on the road to producing 1 million barrels a day, Guyana. So we'll see what happens to Guyana. But no, the Russians are cutting production, the Saudis are cutting production, but it doesn't matter because China is not growing that fast. If China were growing very quickly, then we might have and OPEC and OPEC Plus with Russia and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and so on, were as controlled as they are, then oil prices could be $20 a barrel more. But at this point, and China has no real great prospects, right? Their real estate sector's in the garbage can, and the real estate sector, their construction of real estate, new construction, is 15-20% of GDP. Here it's 4%. Total construction, total is 4%. It's not much, not much. It's very little. 4 or 5, not a lot. So their real estate being in problem is a big problem. It's going to dampen their growth for the foreseeable future. And they have population decline and all that kind of stuff. This is good news too. And then there's manufacturing. This is new data. Manufacturing looked really awful here. It's been in recession for 13 months, so that's not good news. But now it's starting to come out. Maybe another month or 2 or 3, maybe it gets out of recession. That would be lovely. The manufacturing goes in recession from time to time. Here it's in recession. Just before COVID, it was in recession. We get out just to have COVID. But this didn't cause a recession. That didn't cause a recession. Manufacturing doesn't cause recessions when it goes into recession because it's not big enough for the economy. When services go into recession, we're toast. And think about this. Do you have to go out and buy a new car? You can get a used alternator if you want to extend your car life for a year or 2 or whatever, or get some part or whatever it is. Do you have to have a new lamp, new draperies? You can live without a new tie. You can live without almost all these things. But services are a different story. You, God forbid, have some mild cancer, not life-threatening, okay? I don't want to wish you any bad evilness here, but you're going to go get health care. You want radiation, chemo, whatever, Medicare. You're not going to go, wow, Powell's raising rates. The last thing I want to do is stress the healthcare system here in Salt Lake City. I'll take a risk and not get healthcare. No, right? So if healthcare goes into recession, we got a real problem. We're not going out to eat. We're not going to watch a basketball game or whatever it is. That's a very serious problem. So manufacturing is a mild problem, but it looks to be getting better. That's a good news. That reduces the likelihood of recession. And this is services. This is a new slide. This data came out just yesterday, and this is the latest data. And the last note here, that's recession for 1 month, so ignore it. It's just noise. But there, it's now better. But this is not wildly awe-inspiring. It isn't terrible, but you'd like it to be steadily like above 53 or something, right? And here we're sort of bouncing around the very low 50s. So I'm a little nervous. If this goes into recession, for 3 or 4 months, all bets are off. Jump out of the airplane, deploy the parachute, and pray to God. But we're not there. We're not there, right? So we could avoid this recession. We really could. We really can. It's possible here. 3 or 4 months ago, I was much more pessimistic than I am now. I'm still mildly pessimistic, but not as pessimistic as I was. So as miserable as I sound, you're lucky you didn't see me 4 months ago. You owe them a favor. Yeah, Bank of Utah, thank you for not bringing me in September or something, right? So this is better news. This is not bad. And this is the trade deficit. And this is no longer going to be helpful. So we've looked at consumer spending. And we've seen it's very strong, but the fundamentals there are not that great. Credit card use is up. Savings rates are low. Excess savings from COVID is going away. Not so great. This is trade. We always run a trade deficit. So after the Great Recession of 2009, until COVID, we generally ran a $50 billion trade deficit. A little worse here, a little better there, but you get the idea. This hurt GDP. This, by contrast, helped a little bit. In the long run, it doesn't help. This is very counterintuitive, but trade doesn't, in the long run, alter GDP in the slightest. Trade is influenced by savings and investment. If we invest more than we save, we have to run a trade deficit. Literally, this is an outcome of other decisions elsewhere in the economy. I know that sounds impossible to believe, but it's totally true. You cannot, in the long run, increase GDP by fixing the trade deficit. It's not possible. It's only through savings and investment and the relationship between the two. And this is an output of that. We're importing money by running a trade deficit. That sounds crazy, I know, but I'm going off in the weeds here, but I apologize. But in the short run, you can get benefits in GDP. We did. It's over. And now it's done. This is not going to help GDP anymore. So G, the third term in GDP, or the fourth term in GDP, exports minus imports, is out. Done. Goodbye. This is exports, flat. Not a good sign. If exports are flat, it means the world's not doing that great. They're not buying our stuff. And this is imports. This is imports. They were going down as our economy weaker, but now it's going up a little bit. It's not dynamic here either. So they're both kind of, What you ideally always want to see in trade is both going up. If they're both going up, that's good. That means we're strong and the globe is strong. We're importing more and we're exporting more. 2 thumbs up. This is like 2 sideways thumbs. Not 2 down, it's sideways. Nothing good, nothing awful, but not great news. It's not good news. So nothing's happening here. Now, let's look at why I really think we're going to get the recession. I've given you some insights into the good stuff. Inflation's coming down. We'll get to more inflation again. Consumer spending. This is leading economic indicators, right? These are highly correlated with activity 12 months hence. What do we have? We have garbage can data here. This is terrible data. When the index is this low, historically, recession. They're freaking 9 for 9. On their website, it says we're due for a recession. May or may not come, but historically, it says we're due. So if you look at history, history says we're due for the recession. I'll show you more slides that we're due for the recession. But the fact is, COVID is different. It's not a normal recession. And therefore, the recovery from it's different. And the staying power of our economy is stronger because of the excess COVID savings and pent-up demand and so on and so forth. Automobile sales doing well, home construction, which we'll talk about later, doing well. It's a very strange economy we're in. And therefore, the history's never a perfect guide, but maybe it's a little weaker. That's the point. But this says recession. This is corporate investment in equipment. So stuff. And what firms are buying now is intellectual property, right? They're starting to buy ChatGPT type of stuff, right? All these large language models and so on. And if you aren't using ChatGPT, get on it. I use it every week. And it saves me, I would say, 3 or 4 hours a week in work. That's pretty good. I'm not using it probably as intensively as I should, but I'll get there. I'll learn to be better at it. But it's a huge time savings. You're much more productive with ChatGPT. This may be bottoming out, maybe not, I'm not sure. This is investment in equipment, not so hot. It's not hot. So firms' investment in equipment is not going to lead the way out of the recession here because firms are thinking, oh, there might be a recession and the cost of the equipment is more expensive. So the internal rate of return or ROA or ROI or ROE, whatever it is going to have to be higher. It doesn't make sense. We'll wait till rates come down before we buy the whatever it is, the lathe or airplane or whatever it is, right? That's not great. And then there are banks. And banks are reluctant to lend, just as consumers are reluctant to borrow, and business women and businessmen are reluctant to borrow. This data is from Q3. Q4 data just came out. It's somewhere around here. So it's gotten better. This is the percentage of bank lending officers that are tightening standards. So if you're above the x-axis, it's worse. If you're below, it's better. You can see that by that's COVID. No one lent anything. Then the Fed dropped rates to 0, and everybody opened up the lending floodgates spigots. Right? So remember, this has gotten better. It's still tight, which is not good. Even at this lower level, recession. Ignore that one weird quarter. It's a mistake of some sort. But you're 4 for 4 here. You're 9 for 9 in the prior data on leading economic indicators. Firms aren't buying equipment. Nothing's terrible here. This isn't like tightening like that or that. This is a much lower tightening, right? We haven't had the recession yet. If inflation falls, the Fed lowers rates, we avoid. But then you got this stuff. And I'm looking specifically at credit cards and auto loans. Usually when you don't pay your car, they take your car. And when they take your car, you can't get to work. So a car default is not a good thing. It's hard to paper over that and say, it doesn't really matter. It matters. And then there's credit cards. We've used more credit cards, putting more on credit cards. Interest rates are higher, defaults are up. And unemployment's 3.7. Wait till unemployment hits 4.5. Right? It's going to be a little worse. This doesn't mean we're going to get a recession here. Don't get me wrong. Nothing's predetermined here. And our economy is a little different than just historically because of COVID. And I want to think back to 07, 08. In 07, even as early as early 08, even almost like middle of 08, there was almost no talk of recession. Go back and look at newspapers. We were already in the recession as of January. We didn't even know it. And what kept us going through 07 and early 08 was increases in cash out refi. Home prices were appreciating fast. We took money, a huge percent of GDP, several percentage points of GDP was being sucked out of our homes because of high home prices. So that postponed the recession and got us longer before it came. And then, of course, everything fell apart. This time it's excess savings and pent-up demand and automobile demand because of supply chain problems. There's always something, right? History rhymes, never repeats. And this time we may have enough juice to keep us out of recession. But these aren't great signs. We'll get data on this one, I think, today or tomorrow. We'll get new Q4 data, that's Q3 data. And then there's banks. And here's where I want to talk a little bit about commercial real estate. Because there's this big notion out there that commercial real estate is going to hell, office buildings are worth next to nothing, and that's going to cause a recession. And the answer to those questions is yes, it's a problem, and yes, some of those values are going to nothing, but no, it will not cause a recession. It's not a big enough asset class. It's a problem, and if you happen to own an apartment building, an office building that's half vacant, sorry, you're out of luck, and you'll go bankrupt, but I don't care about you, I care about the overall economy. And the overall economy can withstand you going bankrupt, thank you very much. And I read a bunch of academic articles on this topic, precise topic, and their conclusion was that if these banks that seem heavily involved in commercial real estate have to mark all their assets to market because of a potential run on their deposits and so on, a couple hundred local banks could go under. That's not going to cause a recession. It will not. There's not enough money in these banks to cause. If a money center bank goes under, yeah, we're toast, right? Their assets are $1 trillion or $2 trillion to hold, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase. These banks go under, we're in deep doo-doo. Now we can argue if they're too big to fail, another whole conversation. But that's where the problem lies, and they're okay. They don't have that much, and they have money coming from commodities and currency trading, wealth management, and M&A. They have lots of silos, right? So this is all banks, right? And the loan loss reserves now aren't as big as they were when COVID was at its worst. They're not as bad. But if you look at small banks, it's bigger now than it was then. So here you're seeing the impact because these smaller local banks are more likely to be holding commercial real estate loans. You go to a local bank to get a loan for $5 million on a building or whatever it is, right? So this is saying we got a problem here, but it's not big enough to drive us into the drink. Don't sit here and worry about that. Worry about your children, your grandchildren, your marriage, whatever, right? Worry about useful things that you can't affect, but you think you can affect through worrying. Don't worry about this. Save your precious worrying skills for elsewhere. But this is a concern. I mean, and we see these banks a couple of days ago, a couple of banks had huge losses, and the Keefe Bruyette Woods, the KBW bank index, right, is down, 50% from its peak? I think the peak was 180, and now it's 90 or something, the index value. So these banks aren't doing well as a sector because they're held down by this, but they're not big enough to bring the country down. And then there's fiscal and monetary policy. This is 24. 24 is a pretty bad year. Fiscal policy is marginally contraction. It was very expansionary last year. The budget deficit was really, really big. It was unnecessarily big. Part of the reason GDP growth was 3.3% last year, some astounding number, was because the budget deficit was friggin' 7.5%. I mean, that was grossly irresponsible. And if you think I'm here to bash Biden, think again, I can bash Trump really easily because the budget deficit and the economy used to travel together. Good economy, lower deficit, bad economy, big deficit. That's the way. And in 2016, it began to blow out. And since then, there's been very little correlation, or none, between the size of the deficit and the growth in the economy, which should be very correlated. So both parties in the last 8-9 years have been really grossly irresponsible. But nonetheless, fiscal policy is tight and monetary policy is tight. And you may say to yourself, well, why the hell is that? Yeah, here he was raising rates. So I get it, but here he's going to cut rates. Well, he's not going to cut rates as quick as you think, A, and the impact of monetary policy takes 18, 20 months to be felt. 15, 18 months. Milton Friedman said, The impacts of monetary policy has long and variable lags. You'll sound like an economic genius if you say that. Long and variable lags, which means we don't effing know. Yeah, it takes a while. Yeah, whatever. We don't know. That's econ speak for. We have no clue. But we know that the impacts take a while to be fully felt, because if you don't buy a car or buy a house or buy an office building or build a building, you don't care about interest rates. They don't matter to you. Going to a baseball game, yeah, who cares? Going out to dinner, buying a pack of diapers, it doesn't matter, right? Interest rates don't affect you on a daily basis. So we have tighter fiscal policy and equally tight monetary policy, meaning GDP, the drag from fiscal and monetary policy, is now 2.5 points as opposed to maybe 1 point last year. So that's going to drag GDP growth down all by itself, the fiscal and monetary policy drag that we're going to experience, right? So that's going to hurt us. And then we have student loans. Student loans, you're paying $500 a month. You're paying nothing for 3 years. You habituated to it. And the data shows that those people who had student loans who then got them released temporarily, they jacked up their debt somewhere else. It wasn't they used that money to save that money to build up a kitty to maybe pay the student loans later or pay off a car loan. No, let's borrow more money. So this is showing you at different income brackets how many are going to still have trouble making their payments. And then the Fed's raising rates. And this is the big story. This goes back to 55. There were 13 rate hiking cycles. Oh, here, whatever. Here. Of these 13 rate hiking cycles, 10 wound up in recession. So leading economic indicators are bad. Bank lending is bad. One's 8 for 8 or 9 for 9, 4 for 4. Here's 10 for 13. Let me ask you a silly question. Let's pick on somebody. You. What's your name? Bo. Okay, Bo. You have an ankle problem. Not catastrophic, but it causes you pain and it's miserable. And I'm the world's greatest ankle surgeon. You want to play tennis, so your ankle really matters to you. And I tell you, after surgery with me, you're going to have no pain. And you've had pain for 20 years. It's been a really problem. It's ruined your career. Your rankings have fallen, whatever. No pain. And you're ready to hire me to do the work. Yeah, doc, you're the best. And I say, well, hold on. I've checked my research the last 130 times I've done this surgery. It turns out those 130 times, 100 times the patient dies on the table. Now, they have no more pain. And the 30 times they survive, no pain either. So my money back, no pain guaranteed is in effect either way, right? What do you say? You go, I'll live with the pain, thanks very much. But we're now in surgery. Bo's in surgery, I'm doing surgery, I got the scalpels, I'm cutting him to shreds here, and he's praying for his life. But 10 out of 13 times we end up in recession. We don't 3 times. Here, 64, 84, and 94. In purple, you can see it. And might possibly 24. It's possible, right? You get a little lucky and you avoid the recession. It isn't that the Fed's any good. It isn't that the Fed knows. As a matter of fact, here, there was a book written about Alan Greenspan called Maestro, because he was the central bank chair back then. And he was genius. He raised rates just enough. He began to lower rates just in time. He avoided recession. He was the same central banker that got it completely wrong here. Completely, 100%. He missed it entirely. He got lucky. So, Bo, had you gone to surgery with him, you had a 50% chance of living. But it wasn't, he was so good, he was lucky the first time. The luck here was, luck is a relative word here, but in fiscal policy luck in this case, the Vietnam War was ramping up, so we were buying a lot of guns to help the Viet Minh fight the Viet Cong in a pointless war, but I digress. It wasn't the soldiers' fault. We'd had other useless wars, but I digress. I'm happy to hit the Houthis, however. I'm not like a pacifist here, but 84. I'm no patsy here, but retrospect is easy. It's all easy after the fact to realize, like I realize now, I made a mistake marrying the woman who became my ex-wife. Now it's obvious. At the time, it wasn't clear, Now I know. Okay. 84, up here, 84, energy prices collapsed. So I gave a speech in Houston, which was the epicenter of the collapse in oil prices for Texas, right? It's not Dallas and Austin or San Antonio, it's Houston. In 84, people in the audience old enough to remember, who are now 60, 65, 70 years old, they remembered that the buildings were empty in Houston, half-built, completely vacant buildings, and the owners just mailed the keys back to the lender and said, keep it, it's yours, thanks very much. Lafayette, Louisiana in '83 had the highest percentage of millionaires per capita in the country. And by '86, Lafayette was a crap can because oil prices collapsed. And that saved us from a recession. We got a tax cut, essentially, courtesy of Shell and BP and Chevron and those days, Texaco. And here in '94, it was the tech boom. The NASDAQ was going bonkers and millionaires were being minted every day in Silicon Valley. So a little bit of luck and you can avoid the recession. We might get that luck now. It's entirely possible. Excess COVID savings, pent-up demand, automobile sales, new home construction, still doing well. That might, manufacturing having been, but getting out of recession, it's entirely possible. I don't want you to think it's not going to happen. The recession will happen. It may not. That's why. But we've talked already about this, and we've talked about this, and we've talked about this, and this, right? There's a lot of reasons why we're likely to get the recession. But, and the last one I'm going to bring up is this, the inverted yield curve. So the yield curve is a relationship between time and money. You can think of it as a borrower or lender. The borrower is easier because we're all borrowers at some point. You want to buy a house, you get a mortgage, a home mortgage. And the mortgage is more expensive, the interest rate is higher the longer you borrow. You want a 10-year mortgage, I'm making up 5%. 20-year mortgage, 6%, 30-year mortgage, 7%, right? Because the lender's taking risk. You could die, you could lose your job, the house could get hit by a rocket, things go wrong. But not right now. Right now, the yield curve is inverted. That means short-term interest rates are higher than long-term interest. The longer you borrow, the cheaper the money. A 6-month treasury pays 5.2%, right? 3-month treasury, 5.2, 5.3, whatever, I haven't looked today. And a 10-year treasury, I looked just now, 4.1. You want to borrow for 6 months? Borrow for 10 years and pay back in 6 months. And you're cheaper than borrowing for 6 months. The first time I heard about this, I was in college. It made no sense. This couldn't be. But it is. Now, every time the yield curve's inverted, the blue squiggle goes above the red bar. You're kind of skeptical, like, why do we care, Elliot? What's the point? Bear with me, I'm cutting. Except for here, inversion, recession, lots of inversions, 2 recessions, inversion, recession. She's so upset about the recessions and the inversions, she's leaving. Now, I'm sorry I upset you so, miss. I really apologize. I hope you come back. This is pretty powerful. Now, all right, look, in other countries, it doesn't work so well. The US, it does work. This doesn't mean it works again. But we've had an inversion for a long time, and the inversion's been pretty steep. Now I'm going to scare you more. Now the inversion's getting less steep. It's coming down. I've told you before you want to be below the red line. It's now getting closer to being below the red line. Isn't that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. Why not? Look here. It inverts, the inversion goes away, and then the recession hits. So the yield curve is normal, it inverts, and then it goes back to normal, and then the recession hits. Right there, and there, and there. And you go, WTF? What the hell's going on? You tell me you want a regular upward sloping yield curve. It becomes inverted, which is really bad. Then it goes back to being normal, and then the recession hits about half the time. What is it? The answer is time. It takes about 2 years to get a recession on average when the Fed begins to raise rates. When the Fed begins to raise rates, you often get an inverted yield curve. Not always. Didn't get it in '84, didn't get it in '94. But usually you get the inverted yield curve because the Fed raises too much. We realize the Fed's done too much damage to the economy, and they know they're going to have to lower rates, and that causes the inverted yield curve. Now, it takes 2 years for the yield curve to go from normal to inverted back to normal. It takes like 2 years. So now the yield curve is coming back to normal. Wow, this could be a problem. So don't think we're out of the woods because the yield curve is getting back to normal. No, this means 2 years has elapsed, and the recession now is kind of coming into prime recession, like we're in the red zone here. We're going to score a recession touchdown here, right? So this is not, it could be good news if you have no recession, but in and of itself is not in and of itself good news. It's just news. And I'll give you an example of why this is the case. Our economy is very large. To generate a recession takes a lot of work. When I was a little kid, I remember reading Sweden had 2 large exports. One of them was Volvo cars, which are now Chinese. Not that I'm bitter. And the other was ABBA. I'm not making this up. ABBA was some years #1 ahead of Volvo in exports from Sweden. So if our taste in cars changed, and we said, we don't want safe cars, we all want to drive, what's the one that Ralph Nader got famous on? The Corvair, the Ford, GM Corvair, Chevy Corvair. So we all want to drive Corvairs that are like death boxes that made Ralph Nader rich and famous. Not rich, but famous. He got the money which he spent on his whatever adventures. And we decided we don't like ABBA anymore because they're passé. Dancing Queens now, whatever, out. Sweden's done. That's it. They're finished. But the US is so large. We had a UAW strike, didn't notice it. Hollywood went on strike, who cares? Oh, I looked back in Katrina back in 05 or 06, whenever Katrina was. There's no evidence of Katrina ever happening. In New Orleans, you can see the data. But nationally, zero. You can have massive hits to our economy with no impact at all. So raising interest rates doesn't generate a recession quickly. It takes a long time to get a recession. 2 years on average. 2 years. 2 years. So 2 years from first rate hike was Feb 22. Well, Feb 24. We're right around the corner. Yield curve's coming back to normal. 2 years in. The fact that we haven't had a recession only means that we haven't yet had a recession. Hopefully we don't because of other factors. We've talked about cars and autos and pent-up demand, excess COVID savings, and there's more. We avoid it. And how long will the recession last? Okay, so this is the Great Recession. These two together. Since the Great Recession, recessions have been short. Prior to the Great Recession, they were long because no one knew what to do. Prior to the Great Recession, if you had a recession, government cut back on spending. So government wasn't that big in those days, and banks stopped lending and so on. You had fiscal policy contraction, which was, of course, the wrong thing to do. That was a pro-cyclical behavior, right? Totally wrong. Since then, with a couple exceptions, 74, 75 Arab oil embargo, 81, 82, second Paul Volcker recession. That was the first. I'm going to come back to this. And then here, the 08, 09 housing bust. This one was long because oil prices quadrupled and suddenly asset values of factories collapsed, right? That's a bad one. And they had to fall in price to make them economically viable again. Similarly here, for different reasons, house prices had to collapse. And to get real asset prices to decline is very hard. Your Apple stock is traded every second of every day. You want to sell Apple stock? I know it's worth $88.13. I know exactly what it is. But if you want to buy a building, oh, that's a whole, you hire a realtor and a broker and you start to argue and you think this and they think that and deals happen or not. To get those prices down, those sellers have to be kicked hard. That's why this recession was long and partly why that recession was long. Now, let's talk about this recession. This recession sort of superficially looks similar to what we have now. High interest rates. Here, however, we had 15 years of high interest rates, 15 years of high rates, 15 years. From 65 on, there was utterly muddled, at best, utterly muddled monetary policy through a series of central bankers, William McChesney Martin, Bill Miller, Arthur Burns. Yeah, the triptych of idiots. Jay Powell doesn't want to be number 4. So far, he's avoided it. He may go down as a hero. He induced the recession, high interest rates, but he got us out without a recession. We're not like that. Now, Powell on Wednesday, when he had the meeting, last Wednesday, when he had the press conference after the central bank meeting, he was channeling that recession. He told us, well, we want to have more time. We're not really sure. We're thinking about some cuts, but no hikes, but we don't know when. We want to be sure. Because here, Paul Volcker induced a recession, lowered rates, and what happened? Bam! Massive inflation followed by a big, bad recession. He cut rates much too early here, and the Fed's reliving the short recession of 1980. Now, in 2024, 44 years later. We could argue the economy's different, whatever. That's what Powell was channeling in that conference, right? So I don't think it's a bad recession. 6-7 months, garden variety, we're through it. Now, let's talk about the labor market. Labor market's really strange. Unemployment's going up. Last couple of months it went down a bit, but it's generally going up. When unemployment goes up, 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 it really goes up. You very rarely see inflation go up, unemployment go up, and then come down. That was the non-recession of 84, 85. This is a non-recession of 94, 95, when it goes up and then comes down. So twice you get this terrific effect where it goes up and then it comes down again. But the other 9 times, you get a recession. Is this like 84, 85, or 94, 95, or 64, which is not here? I don't know. If I'm a betting man, I'm saying no, but maybe, right? Could be. The work week shrank. This is overtime hours. It shrank. That's really bad. When overtime hours are low, you get a recession, a recession, a recession, a recession, a recession. 5 for 5 here. Not great story, right? Here, quit rates are coming down, but when quit rates come down, you tend to get recessions. Now, quit rates were inordinately high here because no one was working. At the worst of COVID, all the old people left because they were going to die, right? The labor force just disappeared. No one went to work. So if you went to work, you could quit your job, make a fortune, try changing jobs. So people changed their jobs. This was artificially high. It comes down. Maybe this isn't similar to that because the starting point was so damn high. So maybe it's okay, but it's not low enough, and I'll explain to you why in a couple of seconds. This is the work week. It shrank a lot. There's weather here that may have affected the number. So I'm not convinced this is entirely real. It may just bounce back up next month. We will see, right? But the problem is as follows. This is wage growth, blue. Prior to COVID, it was about 3%. That was exactly 3. That was 3.5. That was 2.5. 2.5, 3.5, 3. If wage growth is 3% and labor productivity is 1% historically, 3 minus 1 gets you to 2% inflation. That's what the Fed needs. This is 4.1 or it's 4%. It's too damn high. It's got to get lower. To get it lower, you're probably going to have to raise the unemployment rate. And to do that, you're going to get a recession. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of reasons why maybe not. Moreover, this is the work week, a weekly earnings. Here, they're slipping from 5% to now closer to 3 because the weekly hours of work is below friggin' 0. So we're hiring lots of people. Last month we hired 353,000 people. The month before we hired 333,000 people. And yet the total hours worked in the country. So all workers times hours worked, right? This isn't you personally. It's all 160 million of us. Friggin' shrinking. So our pay is going up, but our work hours are going down. So total growth in wages is shrinking. It's still positive at 3%, but inflation's roughly 3%. So this is weird. We're hiring, but not increasing hours worked. Something's got to give here. We get a recession, and it gets worse, or we don't have a recession, and it gets better, and then wages go up, and maybe we avoid the recession. And this is showing you total hours worked in the country changed year over year. 0. It's friggin' 0 the last couple quarters. No improvement. We're hiring workers, and total hours aren't going up. So we're susceptible. If something goes wrong here, we're susceptible. We need to see this go up. Then more wages, more people working and more wages, and then that gap, the $1 trillion gap starts to get eaten away. This is total employment growth. So look at it. Every month we're hiring damn workers, but yet total hours worked is flat to declining. Something's got to give. This is unsustainable. You can't keep hiring workers and not having hours go up. Hours go up. So I'm nervous about this. Now, why? How could it be possible that we avoid the recession here? And here's how. First, labor productivity, labor force participation rate. So the percentage of Americans over 16 who are working has gone up. It was very bad when COVID hit because a lot of people got fired, quit, whatever. It improves, it improves, it improves. Last 2 months have been really clunker numbers. I'm hoping it comes back up. But if this goes up or stays at that level, lots of people looking for jobs. If folks looking for jobs, then firms can hire workers at lower pay. And that solves the problem for inflation, right? Wages go down a little bit, inflation's not bad, the Fed lowers rates, We skirt the recession. And the other thing, there's three reasons. That's first. The second one's immigration. In 2023, immigration, legal immigration, was its highest level since the turn of the century, 23 years ago. If we continue to have good legal immigration, and those people work, and we have good labor force participation numbers, we could have enough people, we wouldn't have a labor shortage, wages would grow more slowly, inflation falls, Fed lowers rates, we avoid a recession. We need good labor force participation. We need good immigration. And this is labor force productivity. And if labor force productivity, the last 2 quarters here have been stellar. They are the best quarters, ignore COVID. That only happened because firms fired all their low-wage workers. So it made it look like labor productivity was going up. It wasn't. That's the best number we've had since here, 10, 12 years ago. If this is sustained and real, magic, that's magic. So more people working, more immigration, higher labor productivity, we avoid the recession. This is doable, right? A little luck and you get it here. So I don't want you to walk out, as I joke, I don't want you to walk out like depressed. I just want you to walk out a little nervous. If you do that, I'm a happy guy. Not a lot nervous, just a little nervous. Now we'll talk about inflation, then housing, we'll wrap it up. This is my evidence of inflation. No question it's there, right? So here, this is inflation, CPI inflation. What you think of as inflation. Blue is headline. They'll say last month, month-over-month inflation was 0.2 of a point or 3 or whatever, year-over-year 5 or whatever the numbers they come out. Every month, middle of the month, like the 12th to 13th of the month, they come out with the inflation numbers. Economists ignore the blue and look at the red. You look at the red because A, it's it's less volatile, right? It doesn't bounce around so much. It excludes food and energy. And your initial reaction, of course, is, my God, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I spend a lot of money on food. I fill my car every week. I'm buying a lot of food. This is $1,000 a month easily between food and energy. How can you ignore that? Especially for a working class family earning $60,000, $70,000 with a couple of kids, they can spend a third of their income on food and energy. How can you ignore this? You ignore it because the Fed can't do a damn thing about it. If wages are going up high, they can slow the economy down by raising rates. But if energy prices are high because the Saudis cut production, what the hell can we do about it by raising interest rates? Or there's a war, or there's a crop failure in Iowa. What's interest rate hike going to do there? Nothing. Just drive us into recession with a crop failure. Not helpful. Beetle infestation or whatever, right? So economists look at red. Red's coming down. This is nice. Okay, I'm happy. And then the Fed doesn't even look at CPI. The Fed looks at PCE. Different measure of inflation. During Q&A, you can ask me. You don't care, but I'll answer as you care. If you want to answer, I'm telling you, don't bother, but you can. Here, they're all coming down too. So core is coming down. Headlines coming down. That's good. This is actually below 3%. That's a key number. If it stays below and falls to 2.8, 2.7, they're going to cut rates. They're on the verge of cutting rates. They just want to be sure because they don't want to relive the recession of 1980, that 6-month Paul Volcker first recession that's terrorizing Powell, right? So what's the Fed going to do? Absolutely nothing. And they told us this. Believe Powell. Believe him. You have to believe Powell. He gets, in the meetings he has with the FOMC, they're always unanimous decisions. He gets 1 dissent every 3 or 4 meetings. So it gets 50-1 is the ratio of agreements to people who are against him. And he said, we're not going to lower rates anytime soon. Markets always think Powell's going to be nice and give him a Christmas present all the time. And Powell always takes the Christmas present away and burns the Christmas tree. All right? Believe him, he's got a match in his hand. Don't think Powell's on a mission here, right? And the last reason before we get to housing is this, the money supply. Historically, the money supply shrinks here, and there, by a big number, 4% or more, 5%, whatever, you get a recession. Because banks aren't lending. Banks aren't lending because rates are high. We know banks aren't lending. I showed you the data earlier. Banks aren't lending now. Money supply shrinking pretty fast. This normally would cause a recession, but not now. Why? Because of this. We've never seen this. This is friggin' money supply growing like mushrooms after a friggin' rainstorm. Right? So everybody here in the room refinanced their house, refinanced their boat, refinanced their building, refinanced your cap structure through early 22 was golden. You got 5 years. So our economy is a little bit less interest rate sensitive than it had been in prior times. A little bit. It's still very interesting, but a little bit less. That gives us runway to withstand this before we hit a recession. If this comes up fast enough, we avoid a recession. Let's talk about housing. We'll wrap it up. First, the housing market's in a recession right now already. There's no question. Residential real estate sucks. New construction, different story. But existing is terrible because there's no inventory. There's 1 million units. We've never seen, except for here, early 23 and early 22 and early 23. And there's a seasonality, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. It's like a saw, right? First half of the year, up, and down. How much will it go up? And last year was odd. It didn't have that. It just went up the whole year pretty much. At the end, went down a little bit because the market's wacko because all of you have a 3% 30-year mortgage. And you don't care about me. I'm 27. I need a house. You don't care about me. You just care about your cheap mortgage. And because you care about your cheap mortgage more than me and my life and my not nano-tuplets or whatever, I'm living on the street under a bridge because you're saving $300 a month. But kidding aside, that's the problem, right? We all have these low-rate mortgages. No one's putting their house in the market because they're going to have to sell the house and get a house and pay 7. I'm paying 3. I'm going to pay 7. You've got to be kidding me. At 5.5, okay, I'll do it. 6, 5 3/4. As the rates come down, there'll be more movement, but not at 7% like they are. They went up a little bit. They're at 7. So this is problem number 1. There's no inventory because rates were so low for 2 years, from March 20 to March 22. Rates were low. Everybody refied or bought a house. And therefore, existing home sales completely suck. This is the lowest number, with the exception of that, in like 30 years. This is Powell. This is COVID, 4 million. This is the housing bust, 3.8 million. To get below 4 million is very hard, and the only reason we had it here was because Congress stimulated first-time home buyers twice, thinking it would help the market. It didn't. It just pulled demand forward, and then the market collapsed. But even then, 6 months later, it came back. This is a very low number. 24 won't be worse than 23. 21 had 6 million sales, roughly, a little more than 6. 22 had 5 million sales, and 23 had 4 million sales. That's a decline of 50% in the existing housing market. So realtors, appraisers, mortgage lenders, they're all getting crushed now, all getting crushed. Despite that, however, home prices keep rising. Here they begin to fall in the middle of 22 because the Fed raised rates. And when the Fed raises rates, housing prices historically go into the garbage can because they're super interest rate sensitive. But not now, because there's no homes to buy. As I kid, not kid, it's true. While there's not much demand for housing because the rates are so expensive and home inventory is so low and the price of homes are so high, there's even less supply because you're all stuck in your 3% mortgage. Little demand, even less supply. If demand exceeds supply, price goes up. That's what you have here. So even though rates are 7%, you're seeing home prices rise. Again, wacko economy because of the hangover positively from COVID. This is refi activity. No one wakes up and says, I'm going to refi. They're going to say, I'm going to get a HELOC. I'll get a signature loan, but I'm not touching my first lien because that rate is so low. And I'm never going to prepay my loan. And if I move, I'll rent my house. But I'm keeping that mortgage. I'm never going to give up that mortgage, right? And then because there's no existing homes for sale because you're all keeping your mortgage at 3%, look at new home construction. You're kidding me. Rates are very high. And new home construction is not doing bad. On single family, this is multifam. Multifam is now struggling. Oversupply, higher cap rates, higher vacancy rates, and more supply coming online, a lot more supply coming online. It's a bad place to be. But single family construction is outstanding. Again, this shouldn't be. They both should be crashing now, right? Yeah, single family, automobile sales, this really weird stuff. This could prevent us. So we have car sales that are good. This is good. Excess COVID savings, pent-up demand, prior massive increases in the money supply. You put that together, and that may give you enough shock absorber time for interest rates to finally start to come down and Powell to aggressively cut when inflation gets a little bit lower. And if we have a recession, it ain't going to affect housing in the slightest because housing's already been clobbered. If we have a recession, rates fall fast, people will move. And if we have slow recovery, the economy weakens a little bit and the Fed lowers rates, well, lower rates are going to encourage home movement. 13, 14 years ago, we were in a deficit, a really bad demographic situation. Now we're in a great demographic. The demand for housing is very strong. There's no houses. 13 years ago, we were overbuilt by 1.5 million units. Now we're underbuilt by 3 or 4 million units. 13, 14 years ago, you could have built a house. Unemployment was very high, right? Very high, I don't know, 20%, 25. Now there's no unemployment. And this is January. That's the high point in the unemployment rate for housing, construction, because of seasonality. So this rise is not, it's a seasonal thing. It's not really a meaningful thing. And there was a bubble, right? Housing bubble back then, right? Anybody got a loan. You fogged a mirror, you got a loan. Now you got to fog a mirror and have a job. It's not enough. So, then you got 110% mortgage. So you had no equity. House prices collapse. Here are the keys. Here you're averaging 12, 13% down payment. You're not going to give your house away equity. And most people have seen their house price appreciate the last year and a half. The only people who've lost money on a home are people who bought a home in like Boise, Idaho, or Austin, Texas a year and a half ago. They've seen prices fall 10, 15%. But that's about it. There are half a dozen cities. That's it. Very few. San Francisco, because of other problems. They didn't have the up, they just had the down, right? And then there's lastly FICO scores. These are the pristine buyers, 760 and up. These are okay, and these are garbage can, right? Not people, they're FICO scores. People are not FICO scores. Make that clear. Now, pristine buyers. You have a job, you keep your house. Unemployment, if we have a recession, will go up 1.5 points from 3.5 to 5, not from 5.5 to 11 or 5 to 10.5. I don't remember exactly. Went up 550 basis points, 5.5 points. This is a much milder recession, right, if it comes. So don't worry about it. And then construction costs are huge. They went up way up since COVID. So that you can't build a cheap house. Builders don't build cheap houses. If you're a builder and you can build a cheap entry-level house, do it. Because you'll make a ton of money. But the problem is labor and land and capital too expensive and you can't do it. So if you can't do it and you have limited lots and labor, build a fancy house and get a big markup and make a lot of money. Right? Now, what's here and we'll wrap it up. First, just 2 slides. Utah, 10th fastest growing state in the country. By raw numbers, and you're a very small state by population. I mean, compared to all these other bigger states. I mean, look at Georgia, 10 million, Florida, 20, Texas, 30 million people. You're in this crowd of the big performers. It's a little unfair because you're a small state. If you do it by percentage terms, you're 9th. And not that far from 5th or 6th, right? I mean, Delaware, yeah, Joe Biden goes home on the train, the population doubles or something, right? It's 1 million people. I mean, you're a giant by comparison to them, right? So you're a good state. You're not as good as you were. You used to grow faster, right? And you were cheaper. But now you grow slower for a whole bunch of reasons. We can talk about them during Q&A, but you're still okay. But the key thing here is the message I want to get across is to keep your home prices as affordable as possible. Build more friggin' entry-level homes. You need more homes, just build them. You're 30, 40,000 short. Get on with it, right? Don't become California. Don't become Colorado. Wrap it up. 24, probably not going to be a great year. If we avoid the recession, that's great. But GDP is 1.5. We have the recession, it's 1 or 3/4 of a point or something. It isn't going to be catastrophic if it's awful or spectacular if we avoid the recession. The Fed is no longer raising rates. If they say they are, they're lying. Job growth should slow. It hasn't much yet. It looked like it was in the last couple of months, like a chainsaw murderer. It came back up again. Inflation should keep decelerating, at least for a while. Look at inflation because it's enemy number 1, but unemployment is very important. If it starts to go up systematically, rises by 0.5 point or so from the trough, you're probably going to have a recession. I'm going to wrap it up by saying this is my name, my cell number, my phone number, Twitter handle, email address, website. I put out every day 70 words on the economy. No graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, no photos. If you want to hear from me every day, you may not want to. If you do, text the word bow tie, 1 word, literally 1 word, bow tie, no hyphen, no space, to the 5-digit number 66866. That's the phone number. Be prompted for an email address. You'll give it to me. You'll hear from me every day until you die. And if you go to hell, like I am, we'll keep conversing. We'll keep emailing each other in hell, too. It'll be warm, but we'll be okay. At this point, I got a few minutes. I am more than happy to answer questions from the audience. So if you've got questions about my presentation or topics I didn't cover, I am more than happy to give it a shot and answer your questions.
Just raise your hand if you have a question.
We talk a lot about rates, but I think quantitative easing and quantitative tightening has had a big impact on equities stocks. So what's the picture on that aspect of it?
So the Fed has been tightening since they began raising rates in March of 22. They began tightening not that much. It was $50 billion a month, I think, and now it's gone up to about $100 billion a month for the last quite a while. I think they're towards the end of that process. Before the global housing bust, so this is 2008, 7, end of 7, the balance sheet was $1 trillion. It went to about 4 trillion during the housing bust. Then it went down a bit, and then went up to about 8, roughly 8, maybe 9, I don't know. They'll bring it down to 6 or 5, 6. I think within a year, end of this year, they begin to reduce the size of the shrinkage from 100 billion or 80, 90 billion. I think it's 60 billion, 50 billion in treasuries and 35 in mortgage-backed securities, or 25 or something. They'll shrink it down. They want to have a lot of excess reserves in the system because of regulatory burden they're imposing on banks and so on and so forth, more capital requirements and so on. And they have a new tool now. They have not just a Fed funds rate, but now they can actually play with their excess reserves and reduce them and increase them by buying and selling bonds. So I think we're kind of towards the end of that process. So it's not going to matter much longer. We'll end up with a much higher level of excess reserves than we had.
How does the BRICS movement, the funding in petrodollars and all that, how does that relate to
This in general? So the BRICS are important because China's there and because India's there. And those countries matter all by themselves. I struggle to understand what China and India, because they hate each other. They had a war. They don't get along. One's a democracy. One's authoritarian. They don't like each other. And then you add Iran. Okay, they're a worthless country. Argentina, good for nothing. South Africa, economically like a gnat. These are countries that may have only one thing in mind. They don't like the West and SWIFT, right? Money exchange system. That's it. There's nothing else. And what, China's going to say, oh, Argentina, sure, we'll do what you want. No way. China's going to do that to Argentina. Argentina hopes to get some mojo by hanging on to China's coattails, right? But I don't see what solutions, what power they have that grows through the agglomeration of these countries. That's what I really struggle with. I just don't see it. Can they force countries to use their currencies? Yeah, they can. China already is. But that's not a central issue. The central issue for currencies is, do unrelated third parties use your currency? And the dollar shows up in lots of trade, right? Because it's cheaper to go from euros to dollars to pesos than from euro to peso. Because the U.S. market's so strong, that's what the key thing is. And if you get third countries now, if you get France and Argentina using yuan or renminbi, that's a serious deal. But if China forced you to use renminbi, yeah, big deal, who cares? And the U.S. dollar is still so far super safe. I don't see what the benefit is beyond India and China being there with close to 3 billion people. Right? That's what they got. But they have it individually. It looks good. Look, they have a nice, pretty flag. They have meetings. Politicians are happy. Diplomats. I'm very skeptical. Iran, the Saudis, they would gladly kill each other if they could. Shia versus Sunni, Arab versus non-Arab. They hate each other. They made peace because of China, yeah, but there's no love lost there. So I think the fundamental antagonistic problems within the thing is too great to accomplish much of anything.
With all this unknown headed into 2024, where do you put your cash other than, I know it's not commercial real estate.
3-month treasuries are looking pretty sweet at 5.2, right? You can get a 1-year CD at 5.5 or whatever it is, right? So CDs are good. And it depends on your time horizon. I think that's really the issue. If you're 25 years old, who cares? You put in the stock market and you forget about it. And if you're 75 years old, you better have at least 25, 35, 40% of your money in cash or near cash bonds, right? You can't take the risk. And how much cash, real cash, do you have? A little bit of cash, real cash too. So I think that's really the issue. As far as elections go, I don't want to really get into the politics here, but the economics of it is, and any financial advisor will tell you, any economist, don't base your portfolio allocation decisions based on the win of the White House. That's a loser strategy. Stick with whatever your plan was, whether Biden wins or Trump wins, just stick with whatever it was. You're going to increase your this or decrease it, stick with it. Because historically, oddly enough, historically, Democrats are much better in the White House for the stock market than Republicans, because Republicans seem to always end up with a recession. Since Nixon, all recessions have been during Republican administrations. It's just random luck. So, you know, oh, a Republican will win, it's good for taxes, or whatever. Don't even go there. Just stick with your plan. I hope that's something. Any more questions? I can say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Presentation. Thank you so much for being here. A couple things. We do have parking validations for you, so be sure to pick one of those up on your way out. There's also a survey on the back of your agenda, if you wouldn't mind helping us with that, so we can improve our events in the future. And we are going to be sending out a recap email to you if you like with this presentation. So thank you very much for attending.